and then once it's connected, I'm just gonna go home and it'll work as much as I did. Don't worry about the printer right now because you'll have to get up to the okay, so the meeting's live. And it's 6:01, so we're gonna go ahead and
call the meeting to order.
It's yep. Yep, pass it to me.
Okay. Call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Moved by Eric Boise, seconded by
Camille Valeski.
Rob Alutsky, that the planning advisory meeting be opened at 6 p.m. All in favor? Carried.
So just hold on a minute. Mary will give that back. Just kidding. Yep.
That's his name is harder to say. If I say it enough times, I'll be able to say it.
You can just write your first name or initial is fine.
I'll pass it down to Gina.
And then you'll want to leave it up so you know you can follow your numbers. Okay.
Moved by Kemp, seconded by Gina, that the minutes of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting held February 7th, 2023 be adopted as circulated. All in favor? Carried. And I have to sign this, right?
Yeah.
Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Hearing none. Any presentations from the public? No. Other business. Is the discussion by J.L. Richards, read the background report on our official plan and zoning bylaw review. And I'm sorry, it's Jason and
Marilyn are here with us over
Jason
Zoom.
and Marilyn.
Yep.
Welcome, Jason and Marilyn, to our meeting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to ask if they want to lead the discussion or if they have any comments to start?
Okay. I can't hear anything. Can
They
you
haven't started talking yet.
They haven't said
No.
anything. Okay. Would you like to start the discussions tonight on our official plan? And I know that there are members who do have questions and have reviewed the draft that you have given us. And I have discussed with our manager Green some of the issues of concern. And I guess we'll start with Jason and Marilyn.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us tonight. I thought we should start with some introductions because I don't know that all of you have met Jason yet, or myself actually for that matter. So my name is Marilyn Cameron. I'm a planner with J.L. Richards, and I'm here with Jason Farragon. He's our planning chief at J.L. Richards. And we, along with our coworker Dave Wellwood, another planner, are part of the project team that is working with Manager Green on this update to the official plan and zoning bylaw. And so for those who attended or viewed after the fact, we did a bit of a recap at the February 15th council meeting to give you a bit of a background on what the purpose of the official plan and zoning bylaw review and update are. And so we'll be following up on that tonight. And I'll do a little bit more of an introduction to that in just a moment. I am wondering if you wouldn't mind, just because it's difficult to see, could I request that we just get your names as well there so we know who's present? Apologies, it's difficult to see any nameplates or anything like that there.
Oh, yeah, we don't have them quite yet, but if you want to start, Gina.
I'm Gina Langua.
Sorry, I'm Neri Paquette.
Eric Foisey.
And Cam Wroblewski.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so yes, let me just go over what we'll be discussing tonight then to get us started. So to date, what's happened so far, the project kicked off really at the beginning, or sorry, mid last year. And at that time, Jason met with members of different ministries, provincial ministries, to discuss what their priorities for this official plan and zoning bylaw update would be. And then in November, myself and Dave met with Manager Green to discuss kicking off the project in full. And then we've, in the background, been working on a bit of a summary and a report to present to you. And so you have that in front of you in the agenda package today. And then most recently, February 15th, we met for a public meeting to get council's approval to go forward with the project and to hear from members of the public on some of those priority issues. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to hear specifically from this committee what your feedback is on the report, what you've heard from the public to date, and to give some direction that Jason and Dave and myself can take as we go forward with the update to the policies. So specifically, we're going to be looking for your comments and feedback on the report and the themes we've heard from the public. We're going to discuss some of the policy implications, so feel free to ask lots of questions about that. And we're going to identify issues that you'd like to make sure we hear from the public throughout our upcoming engagement activities. And essentially the goal is really just to make sure that you as a committee feel that we have sufficient context here to go forward and update these policies. So before I get too much further ahead, I'd like to double check. Chair, are there any questions from the committee at present?
Any questions on the draft that they have provided?
Anyone want to, yeah.
I'm not sure.
No.
No? Do you have any question?
Not on the draft, no.
I guess we do have questions and wanting to understand. I don't know if we could go through it, or as we go through the plan, if we could, there are concerns and issues that we'd like to talk about. I wonder if we should do it that way or.
Excellent. I was going to suggest there's probably two ways we could proceed. If you have direct questions that immediately stand out, we could start with those. But if not, we can just go theme by theme through the report, take up questions as we go. How does that sound?
Would you like that?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Great.
And that way at least it gives us the chance to deal with each of the issues. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that direction. Okay. So we've discussed at the February 15th meeting in more detail the purpose of an official plan review and the planning framework and legislation set by the province for why we do these reviews and what those requirements are. So we won't go into too much detail here. I do want to make one note because one key provincial planning document that we will reference quite a bit, the provincial policy statement. My first note about it is that I will definitely use the acronym PPS this evening. I'm sure Jason will too. So that is what we are referring to when we use that acronym. And then my second note on that topic is that the provincial policy statement is expected to be updated sometime in the next 6 months. So we are expecting an update to this. This is important for this update because all of the official plan policies are required to be consistent with the PPS. So within the project timeline, we're expecting we will need to probably go back and update some of those policies to make sure we're consistent with any changes the province sets, which are as yet unknown. Jason, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to add there about expected policy changes we should be aware of as we talk tonight.
No, I think you've hit it perfectly. The only other point that I would add is during this review of the PPS by the province, there may also be a change in the implementation standard for the provincial policy statement. So as Marilyn has indicated, the current legislative standard is council's decisions need to be consistent with the provincial policy statement as it exists today. We may see a change as we have in the past towards a shall have regard to implementation standard instead. And generally speaking, without getting into the legalities of it, generally speaking, the shall have regard to standard is seen as a quote unquote lesser implementation standard, which affords local councils more flexibility in determining the pace which you sort of bring yourself into consistency with that provincial policy statement. So potentially good news for local municipalities in the province coming later this spring.
And Chair, are there any questions from the committee about this before we proceed on the next theme?
When you speak about the provincial policy statement and with the amendments that has been made with respect to, I believe it's Bill 23, are they reflected in the provincial policy statement now? Are those changes, because they would affect our what we determine with respect to planning. Are they in the provincial policy statement?
Did you want me to take this one, Marilyn? Or?
I mean, my response, maybe I'll go ahead, Jason, and then you follow up whatever I've missed. So the provincial policy statement is sort of a higher order of policy that it's much more general and sets some guidelines that the official plan must be consistent with. Whereas Bill 23 has much more specific policies, is the legislation which the official plan must also be consistent with. And so gets into a much finer detail with regards to issues of housing, and the zoning bylaw would also be reflected that way because it's an implementation tool. Jason, I feel like I've maybe not answered that most straightforward. You take a stab.
Sure. So no, I think you've answered it wonderfully. I think with the committee, the key takeaway is it's best to consider them as separate documents. And so the government would argue that the changes that they've made through Bill 23 are consistent with the PPS because that's the overriding policy document that's in place today. There's been some rumblings in the planning world that the government may also be contemplating further changes to the Planning Act in addition to the Bill 23 changes, which is about, it keeps pace. If you look at the background report as we described, the number of Planning Act changes that have been implemented since the last official plan was approved in 2013, there have been exactly 10 legislative changes. So in the planning world, we have come to expect that the government will change the Planning Act at least once per year. Because that's the sort of pattern that we've seen in the last decade. But it is, practically speaking, it is best to consider them complementary yet legally separate documents. And I would sort of say, themes that we've been hearing, any changes to the PPS would align with the changes that the government has recently made through Bill 23. It's clear that the government is looking at opportunities of increasing more housing supply across the province. I think the numbers that they've quoted at 150,000 units per year over the next 10 years. To put it in context, Ontario has only ever delivered at its maximum 100,000 new dwelling units per year. So we're talking about a 50% increase in housing supply in order to meet our population targets as a province. But so, sorry, it's a long planning answer. Complementary, but legally separate documents.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to the next theme. This would be section 3 of the report in front of you. So changing climate, and then we'll discuss the natural environment as well, because both of those have similar implications. So climate change, just in summary, is happening in Brownfield as well. We can't escape it. So the impact of that will really be extreme temperatures and a risk of extreme weather events. So, and the impacts of that on property and human safety. We recognize that this is important as well to the township because of the priorities within the strategic plan for this. So the real update essentially to the official plan that we would expect to see in relation to this would be looking for more language about floodplains, ensuring that the policies regarding wildland fire and flooding are up to date. We suggest as well looking at considering a schedule showing wildland fire risk in the township so that policies can be reflective of that and ensure that development doesn't increase that risk. And then this would be also reflected in the zoning bylaw as well. Any changes to the official plan or schedules would be updated in the zoning bylaw as well. This would be things like setbacks, making sure there are enough setbacks from floodplain areas and that development is appropriate to mitigate risk. Other updates might include encouraging policies that support sustainable energy or greening within the township for new development. And then the natural features are similarly impacted by climate change and are just as important to the township. We've also been, as mentioned, we've consulted with the Ministry of Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and they provided feedback as well. The current policies for in the official plan for the natural environment are quite strong at protecting those natural features. But the ministry did note that there is a new candidate area of natural and scientific interest, which is important to the province. And so they'd like to see that reflected and updated on the schedule. So that is one of the policy changes that we'll be making there. That would sort of be an update to the schedule, really. The policies in place are already quite strong for that. And so the ministry reflected that in their comments. Before we proceed on to the next big themes, I'm wondering, are there any questions from the group about climate change policies or natural environment?
Any question?
I suppose I have a question. Regarding, you mentioned promoting like green energy or you know, different type of, I suppose, you know, there's certain bill, like things in the bill 23 and certain other government incentives to you know, build better homes. So how do you propose to promote these ideas of, you know, sustainable living or you know, better insulation or anything like that within the policy? Mm-hmm. Like, what I'm asking, I suppose, more directly, is there something in the official plan that would entice people to go green?
Yeah, the official plan policies might not specifically incentivize in this case, but we could update the language of the policies to be a bit more encouraging for for any new ideas that developers or residents would like to see. So Jason, off the top of my head, I don't know if I have any examples, but are there any that are coming to mind for you?
Yeah, so there's sort of two examples that come to mind. So committee will have heard of community improvement plans before, and what we're sort of seeing is a trend among some municipalities at least offer tax-based incentives to property owners that are looking to sort of upgrade a building, say your insulation or your windows or something like that, to achieve a certain level of energy efficiency that council determines is an appropriate level of energy efficiency, separate from building code matters or anything of that. And in other cases, some municipalities, I can't remember the term for it, but it started out east. There are some municipalities that have entered into agreements with financial institutions to actually provide loans to property owners to undertake the renovations on their property to make them more energy efficient. Apologies for forgetting the name. It's something we can circulate to the screen after the meeting if the committee is interested in learning more about these financial mechanisms that are available.
Our chair came in, Jason,
Good evening,
is the
everyone.
chair of planning.
Sorry, I'm late.
And I'll turn it over to him. I have a question and about the climate change, and this would be for our manager. And I'd like to ask the question, we did have somebody in the municipality for a year and it was on climate change and that study. Is that anything that's beneficial to the plan, or is that anything that would be worked into the plan?
I believe it was provided the report that was done for that position from the grant that the township received for climate change. I believe that was one of the reports that we provided.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, yep, that was taken into account and included in this report here. There's a brief summary of it in one of the paragraphs in section 3 as well. Yeah, so thank you for providing that report.
Okay, thanks. We're on climate change. And then
We're on the discussion of our background report now.
Excellent. So, what would you like me to?
we're here. Do you have any
Am I-
questions on this?
I don't actually, I'm not on the climate change piece.
Okay,
So
so,
we're just walking through each section. They're
Okay.
walking us through, and then if we have any questions, we can ask
okay,
questions.
I'll just keep it here.
Sure.
We can share.
Yeah, I'll grab my quote for document. So we've completed the climate change
And
So
natural
natural
environment.
and natural environment 4.0. And are you speaking to it and then we're adding in our comments and questions?
That's what's been happening
Perfect.
pretty much.
We did just summarize natural environment there as well. Wondering if there are any questions on that topic as well before we move on.
Anybody on the committee?
Nope.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
So 5.0 growth and settlement. Are there any comments before the committee chimes in at all? Anything from the committee on growth and settlement? My only thoughts are, I mean, it talks a little bit about the two hamlets, and then talks about kind of the two urban areas or settlement areas for growth. If we are looking to expand out areas for growth, like I don't know what other kind of rural municipalities do when looking at, obviously we have lots of farmland, want to protect farmland, but if there are farmers looking to move on from farming, like how does that play into the official plan?
That's a great question. As the official plan must be consistent with the provincial policy statement, it's important to note that the provincial policy statement requires that growth primarily occur within the settlement areas that have been designated. So the majority of Bonfield's growth should be encouraged to be taking place within Bonfield and Rutherglen Hamlet settlement areas specifically. That's not to say that growth can't happen outside of the settlement areas as well. But that is where the official plan should be really guiding that growth to take place. Jason, I'm wondering, could you speak to more of the rural growth or growth outside of those
Sure.
settlement areas?
Yeah, happy to. So the committee will be interested to know, so when the 2020 provincial policy statement came into effect, one of the key changes that the government made to the language of that document applied to the rural area. And in the previous version of the provincial policy statement, the government said that municipalities had to specifically limit growth in the rural area of their communities. And in the 2020 provincial policy statement, that word limit has been changed to locally appropriate growth. So what that does is that provides councils greater discretion to determine what is an appropriate pattern of growth within their rural area. So a good example of this would be at the same time that we're working on this project, we're helping the municipality of Callander with their official plan. And one of council's key directions in that particular case is tell us how we can facilitate additional growth in the rural area because they feel like rural growth has been constrained historically. And the policy tools that we have available to us are quite simple. One is the in effect date for your parent rural parcels and what day you use on that parcel fabric to facilitate future consents. The other tools that council has for that are your minimum lot areas and your minimum lot frontages, and then the number of lots that can be created from any parent rural parcel based on whichever date council chooses as being appropriate. The piece around agriculture is a very interesting and insightful question because we'll come to agriculture in a second. And committee, from reading the report, will have sort of seen the comment from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, who's encouraging Bonfield to do a mapping exercise to determine if there are prime agricultural areas within Bonfield. So depending upon the outcome of that exercise, council could see areas of the municipalities that are actually designated as either prime ag land or prime ag areas. If that were to occur, what typically comes along with that designation is a restriction or a prohibition on new lot creation, with the exception of very specific circumstances. So the chair alluded to farmers sort of transitioning out of farming. One of those situations is a resident surplus to a farm operation. That's a very sort of standard type of consent application that we deal with. We provide a lot of in-house planning services to municipalities in the Clay Belt. And I think the number one application that they receive is resident surplus to a farm operation consent application. So, sorry, that's a long and sort of more sort of technical answer there, but there's many dimensions, I guess, to that question, Chair. And it's one that we'll sort of continue to work on as we go through the official plan with committee and staff and council.
Great, thanks. Any other questions on growth and settlement?
No.
I have actually a question.
Yeah, perfect.
So under 5.2 population, so it states like the projected, growth for the certain years, 2021 to 2046, and the first step is in meeting this test is to estimate future population and households, and then plan accordingly to set aside, land for future growth. But is there anything like, are we in the policy able to accommodate rapid growth that is basically unexpected? Like if you have a business that wants to come into town and develop something and, would be basically split commercial, residential, whatnot. But so like we cover, projections and historical data and things like that. But what happens when there's like something that is not foreseen, like rapid growth or some investments that, can we accommodate that quickly without any kind of, red tape?
That's a great question. Chair, thank you for that. And Bonfield has seen that rapid growth. So I think that's, especially over the last census period. So I think that's a really keen thing to be aware of. The vacant land study, which follows that section in the report, would be one way to answer that question. So looking at what land is available for future development. And so in terms of residential lands that have been identified as vacant in that study, there does appear to be sufficient residential property as it's currently designated. This has been identified by MPAC, so it doesn't exactly align with the official plan designations, but it's very close to. And so there is sufficient residential land anticipated for that growth that's anticipated here. In terms of commercial lands, though, there are only about 6 properties vacant for commercial lands at this time. So that's a discussion that we'd also like to have and get a feel for how the committee feels, what development pressures there might be in the future, and whether it might be time to designate or redesignate some lands in strategic areas for future commercial growth. And then, Jason, I'm wondering if you want to jump in if there's anything to add there as part of that discussion to anticipate the unanticipated in terms of growth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think to build on Marilyn's answer, I love the question. There is a way to frame the policies in the official plan so that what you're doing is you're creating what I refer to as criteria-based policies. So you're providing as much flexibility as you can in the types of land uses that you wish to see and where you wish to see them, subject to a development proponent meeting certain criteria. So a really good example, so I work out of our Sudbury office. So I'll tell a small story about Greater Sudbury. So if you've been to Sudbury, you've driven along our arterial roads along the Kingsway as an example. So our planning policies for the Kingsway basically say everything except heavy industrial is permitted, provided that you can bring adequate water and sanitary services to the site. You can accommodate the traffic without undue impact to the road lane capacity or the intersections, and we're respecting the natural environment. So that type of more flexible policy framework that has performance tests associated with it is something that we see as being a very good policy tool for local municipalities, especially local municipalities in Northern Ontario, where the intent is facilitating and encouraging economic growth as opposed to controlling it. If we were in the GTHA, two different fundamentally different philosophies, really.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Marilyn, do you have anything to add for that section?
I think we've covered the key points there. So you have the numbers in front of you, but I think as we move on to the next section, we'll probably discuss those vacant commercial lands again. So if there are no further questions, then we're game to move on.
Great. So moving on to number 6, which is economic development. The paper's stuck up there. There we go. Marilyn, do you have anything comments on this before we?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Okay. A note that since that background report has come out, I've had a very good discussion with Manager Green and as well with Jeff Celentano about an idea to redesignate specific areas of land to commercial to help with potential opportunities to increase tourism along the waterfront. So this would be policies that would support and complement the existing waterfront plan, the Kaibiskong River waterfront plan that was recently adopted, and to build, to support potential commercial development along Church Street, specifically within Bonfield Hamlet. And then Sabrina's also very recently identified some other potential lands that are currently vacant and might be worth looking at further. But before, Manager Green and Jeff Celentano have requested that we get the committee's feedback tonight before going further with that idea. So my question for the group, as you think about your feedback, would be what opportunities do you see for economic development and potential commercial growth within the Hamlet settlement areas? And then I'll ask the chair to ask for general questions about economic development as well.
Sure. Any comments on the commercial development. Just for clarification, and perhaps this is to Manager Green, but Church Street, you had mentioned Church Street. So I'm trying to picture as you come down Church Street, there's some commercial there now.
Mhm.
And is there other property that we have in mind for designating as commercial?
I think is it more of like an area we'd be looking at,
Oh.
Marilyn?
I see.
Yes, we discussed the general area because
Yeah.
Church Street's a municipally managed road. That would be an ideal location along the waterfront, but we didn't discuss specific properties at this point.
Yeah, that's okay. So like it's church and railway and that kind of area.
That general waterfront area, because that's our main boat launch.
Sure. Okay.
And
Sorry,
that's
just-
where the tavern, at one point, we used to have
Yeah,
our
of course.
like a tavern there. So
Okay.
I guess it's a question or a comment. Our strategic plan is 2003, is the last strategic plan we have. So in amending our official plan, we're amending our official plan, thinking about our strategic plan. How do we put that together when we're so far behind in our strategic plan? Like when we amend the official plan, we have to take into consideration what are our plans for our strategic plan. I guess my question is, how do we do that?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And so in this background report, we have taken into account the strategic plan. So that's a key policy document that can complement your official plan, but they serve slightly different purposes. And so they should be complementary to make sure that the official plan serves those strategic priorities. But the official plan will also be much more specific to land use planning, and it can support strategic priorities in other areas, but the strategic plan can take much more a high level and look at priorities that go also beyond land use planning. Jason, do you have anything to add on that subject?
Yes, one small point. So the mechanics of bringing the documents together, and I've been practicing municipal planning now for 24 years, and I don't think that I've seen an example where the strategic plan comes out in 1 year and the official plan is updated within 12 months to align with that document. So typically, I guess our advice for committee and council as we go through this process, if you're thinking about a new strategic plan, when we get to the point where we're talking about the goals and the objectives for this official plan, would be to bring that strategic lens to the goals and objectives in this document to ensure that there's as much alignment as possible. If we get into a scenario where the official plan is adopted and your strategic plan is significantly different from that document, then council always has the ability to go back and initiate, I don't want to describe it as a one-off, but initiate an amendment to bring the official plan in line with the strategic plan. Council doesn't have to wait for the 10 or the 5-year review to update its plan. It has the ability to update its plan whenever it chooses to, based upon whatever plans or policies it puts into place. So you're not holden by the legislation to update it on a certain cycle. You can update it as often as you want.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on economic development? I will just say I agree with the kind of the location or area that we're talking about. It seems to be where we've seen a bit of momentum as far as some community development with the new parks and some investment into our boat launch and what have you. And from the official plan purpose, I would say it makes sense to me that that would be kind of that designated area for the community. Obviously, our strategic plan and or our new census, whenever we get that data out, will kind of dictate, I mean, what private business might be attracted to come to Bonfield and what we could support, i.e., a new tavern or restaurant or grocery store or, that kind of thing. So that's where, we have to be ready for it from an official plan perspective. I get that for sure. But the municipality has lots of work to do to try and make sure that we are attracting those businesses. But that'll come from the strategic plan and all the other work that we have to do. So,
What is that currently designated, that area? Both residential and
There's
commercial?
a mix, yeah. There's one vacant commercial lot, I think, but the majority is residential, yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, questions on economic development? Moving on, 7.0 housing. I don't know if there's any opening comments you have for this section.
I'll just add that the vacant land study identified that there would be sufficient residentially designated lands to anticipate the 140 or so households that are anticipated in that population estimate. That isn't so much a concern as with the commercial lands for this discussion, and that we've heard from the public as well about concerns about housing. So affordability has come up. Short-term rentals were heard at the February 15th meeting. We've heard about some complaints about recreational vehicles and some of the issues they pose, and then some issues about residences or non-residential dwellings being used as a residence. So bunkies, hunting cabins, and the like. So those are some of the issues we've heard to date. We'd love to hear more, especially from this committee, on priorities in that area.
Mary Jardine, did you have your hand up?
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
Anybody on the committee have some comments or questions on that?
I would, that short-term housing or short-term renting, it's been going on for like 50 years or more of people renting out cottages, that sort of thing. And to most of the times that there hasn't really been big issues brought forward to council. And like complaints, like how do people handle a complaint to the municipality presently?
Well, currently we don't have any policies on short-term rentals.
No, I meant complaints.
Oh, generally?
Yeah.
They're received through our webmaster email, and then they're directed to whatever applicable department it's for, and then that department head assesses the complaint and deals with it.
How many complaints have we got on short-term rentals?
There were a few written complaints that were submitted back when this process started, like before I was here last April. Mm-hmm. Those have been submitted to JL Richards already as part of when we were gathering information. I've had probably a few phone calls over the past year roughly that I've been here, just verbally expressing concerns about the short-term rentals.
And what sort of concerns?
Mainly the ones on the lake septics, like increased occupants in the home using septic tanks, and are they emptying the septic tanks, and where is that going? And then also I've had a concern about a private road, the increased traffic, because a house is being used as an Airbnb, and there was lots of increased traffic in and out of the road that was maintained by a private road association, not the municipality.
So, and anything else?
Those were pretty well
Just
the
kind of
complaints
two complaints
that I can recall that I've had since I've been here.
I mean, I can add into that only for the fact that we just came through the election, and it was a topic that came up frequently in the public from a candidate's point of view. I'm sure there's a few people at the table that can agree with that. I remember in the past council, there was presentations made to council with concerns raised about what Manager Green was talking about. Additionally, you know, the noise complaints, the property maintenance standards, all of those kinds of concerns are brought forward. We have, I agree with you, short-term rentals have been around a long time. I think the world has changed around it as far as the advertising ability for it and the web and just the popularity of them. And I think that's where the balance is.
I was just concerned, and what I've been reading about it is how easy it is for somebody to make a complaint without, I know to make a dog complaint, You have to have pictures. You have to have the date of the incident. You have to report it as soon as possible. And what I'm finding or hearing outside is just people saying, oh, this and that. Well, when did it happen? You know, when did you submit your complaints? So it's kind of like, sometimes I just find that people are just calling, oh, too many people are using the road, or, oh, the septic, where it's not really been validated. So like, what's your proof? So it's my concern that sometimes people can speak without validation to it, but yet even for, you know, a dog complaint, we have the Humane Society that governs our for our dog issues, and they want specifics. They want to know the date of the occurrence. And I get that, because it's easy for people to say this and that, and like there almost be more of a what would you call it? A policy or something for a complaint process.
Make it easier to complain.
Well, not even easier. Think about then, okay, so what do they have? It's easy to say, oh, this and that. Well, okay, when did it happen? What were the circumstances, your date? And did you go to the bylaw officer about a noise complaint? Did you contact this person? Because we have a lot of policies in place for these kinds of things that they're talking about.
I would say that for every complaint, you multiply that by 5 times for the people that.
I'm
like,
not so sure about that.
Yeah.
Do you live on the lake or
No,
around
not for that, but
or
for other
around
things.
any short-term rentals?
No.
Because it makes a difference if you've been around the lake and you know, that sort of thing, and talking to other people are also being involved. I'm not a short-term rental.
Sure. I can appreciate your point of wanting to make sure that we have the process in place, so that there is a strong complaints process within the municipality. It is actually something that the council's talked about wanting to look at as far as our various policies and procedures that we have, and various ways for the constituents to reach into the municipality. I think my sense is many municipalities have taken a stance and created some sort of policy on short-term rentals. So there is some guiding principles for owners of property to have to follow, and that the other residents know where the line in the sand is. And I think that's where the public is looking to the council to really try and figure out, and hopefully with some guidance through this official plan, is where's that line in the sand for council to really just trying to find that balance and make sure that, you know, we are still open to the idea of short-term rentals, but with those constraints in place, that it doesn't get out of hand. It doesn't become an out-of-town investment that is just a party house every weekend, which is where some of the concerns that we hear, right? So
Right, and and as long as they have the support and the dates and of all these occurrences
absolutely. But I think the way I look at it is rising above any individual occurrence and really taking a look at it from a municipal standpoint and saying, where are we happy from a municipality from a short-term rental standpoint? What makes sense to us as that land and sand? And then if somebody breaches that, well, then we've had a fulsome conversation about it. And our bylaw officer has something to act upon, and we have all of that, as opposed to right now, there really isn't anything tangible. So, the idea of people buying investment properties for the sole purpose of renting it out can happen in our municipality, and I'm not sure.
Do we know the amount? Like, do we have stats?
I don't know
on that
stats on it.
Yeah, because my concern is just sometimes, if we bring it, way up there and it's not even necessary, like for it isn't that big of a problem to make things over and above what they need to be.
Right. Yeah, and that's all fair points, because I don't have the data to back it up. I'm sure Member Paquette can also speak to the fact that we all heard it in the election for sure. It was one of the premier issues that we heard from constituents from. So it's out there for sure as far as, issues that the municipality is concerned about. So
yeah, no, I personally was asked to do that petition out in my area, And I was asked, I asked them, okay, what are your concerns?
Mhm.
And then some of the concerns, I'm going, that's all of the things that we do on the lake.
Right.
That's what your children did on the lake. That's, that's bringing families together and groups and picnics and children playing and all those sorts of things. And as for families, like cottages aren't just for the rich anymore, but it's come to that. So it's kind of nice that that families do get to rent a cottage and experience, the same sorts of things. And
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
and then also for cottage succession, some people might have to do short-term rentals in order to keep the cottage in the family. So there's all kinds of things to look at and give other people the opportunities. And the same is for camping. I don't know if you've ever tried to go camping or tried to reserve a site. Like, it's limited now. You're on the phone, and it's a great opportunity to get families out and experience canoeing and doing what people do on the lake.
Yeah, fair enough. Perhaps I'll ask if there's any kind of overarching comments. I mean, I know we're not the only municipality that you're working with. Other municipalities are facing this. If you would mind speaking to that.
Sure. On the topic of short-term rentals as well, I might just also add that, as you've mentioned, Chair, other municipalities are often addressing this through a bylaw. So this short-term rental bylaw, which then regulates and sets certain requirements for a property to be listed as a short-term rental. So this is one option that could happen outside of this review. And so in that way, the township has more time to really decide what the priorities for that are and what the real need is. Where the official plan can address this is in setting some more general policies at this point, just to address some of the needs specific to potentially issues of servicing or roads. That might be one way we can address this now, but there's still room for the township to reconsider this as in the future. And Jason, I'm wondering, do you want to add there about maybe some other municipalities that you're seeing?
Sure, yes, and I think Marilyn's answer is 100% correct. So through the official plan process, what we're going to do is give you a policy framework that then will allow council to study this issue further in a separate process and make whatever choices you choose to make in that process. And that can range from relying on the existing tools that you have in effect today. So committee had talked about noise bylaw, that's a great example. That could be something like voluntary registrations for individuals that are using their properties as short-term rentals. So the municipality has a line of sight on which properties are being used. And there is this concept of responsible owner that will sort of typically come along with this voluntary registration process. That could mean licensing as well, which is a step that we see a lot of our clients sort of taking, usually in a graduated fashion as I'm describing. And then the final tool that council has, as committee knows, is the zoning bylaw. So some municipalities are taking steps to prohibit short-term rentals in certain areas of their community where the density of short-term rentals that exist within that community is creating land use planning issues for folks that own homes in that area. So the good news is you have a series of tools at your disposal. Most municipalities that we work with will typically begin with education, then we'll go to a voluntary registry type system before they get to licensing. Usually zoning is a much more in-depth conversation, if I can describe it that way, because that creates questions around legal nonconformities and legal non-complying properties. But the good news is there's lots of tools. Through this process, what we're going to do is give you the policy framework to sort of basically explore that further through a more detailed conversation. So the official plan is enabling a future choice as opposed to preventing a future choice.
And I also know that some of the municipalities are also lowering now what they originally set out in their bylaws, that they're lessening them once they, I guess, get into it more. And like, hasn't Township of East Ferris lessened their restrictions? I believe, on short-term rentals.
So I'm not familiar with the East Ferris situation, but I know with the municipalities that we've worked with, enforcement is education and enforcement are usually the top two discussion points as it relates to short-term rental accommodations. And we know from consulting with short-term rental operators in municipalities that, you know, they are comfortable with some sort of voluntary registry or licensing system. From their perspective, they want to ensure that the rules that municipalities enact, generally speaking, are quote unquote reasonable from their perspective. So in our experience, it's a very delicate community conversation that requires time and care and attention to get the sort of right outcome for the community.
Yeah, because also then we want to bring people in, and we don't have a lot of accommodations in Bonfield. So these short-term rentals for people, you know, out snowmobiling and fishing and all those wonderful things that our area has to offer. You know, a lot of people for years come to the same cottage, you know, have been here year after year. And I mean, we have ownership, people from the States, people from down south. It's nothing new. They've been here a long time with the ownership. And then we talk about roads, we talk about septic. Those were the two complaints. Well, we would also have those same issues if the cottage beside us had beside me had 5 brothers and sisters that own it. And their kids are coming in and out. Like you have a lot of traffic, or people are having families out, and lands are more developed now than they were 30 years ago. So you have more traffic on the road. So things change. So sometimes it's not just about what they're complaining about, just isn't about a short-term rental. It could be, it's not just to the issue of the short-term rental. So I just would like our committee and council to think of that if we're doing a policy or something, that we're not making it so, how would you say that?
To eliminate it.
Yeah, to eliminate it and restrict for something that's been done for a long, many years.
Okay, thank you. Any other, yeah?
I wanted a little bit more clarity on, so we talked about the implementation of a policy mainly through licensing or voluntary registration. And even, I guess you mentioned also, if it comes to its zoning and certain properties or certain areas that wouldn't allow it, leaving that aside, the licensing and voluntary registration, I personally don't see what it does. Like if person A has a house and they go away for a little while and they rent it out, and they're not registered, and person B voluntarily registers, and they go away and they have, you know, and they rent it out for a couple of days or whatever. Like, what does the registration actually do other than has a paper trail at the municipal office that, you know, person B is renting while person A doesn't have a paper trail, but they're doing the same thing. So that's the first point I want to make. And the second point is, do we as a municipality, I know that this is still a sensitive topic, but do we have kind of an idea where we're going with this, or is it still at the stage where we haven't figured out where that line is? Like, because the complaints, as you had said, they're complaints that they're neighborly complaints. They're not necessarily due to the fact that these are renters. People may not like the fact that they are renters and they're not familiar faces, so they might be more inclined to try to put an end to it because they don't want a revolving door beside them. But if these complaints, like a noise complaint, then you know, you call in your bylaw officer and they deal with the noise complaint. But I'm just trying to relate how we can regulate or what regulation and voluntary registration would impact a rental, short-term rental. That's where I'm not understanding it. Even if we have, you know, 50% of Talon Lake, for example, registered as short-term rentals, but there's no complaints, are they paying for these registrations? Or do they become mandatory when people don't, let's say, voluntarily register?
So before I turn it over for fulsome answer, I will, from a municipal standpoint, say the short answer is no. I don't think that there's been a wholesome conversation about where the municipality is going to land on it. I mean, we have to go through the appropriate process, which will include consultations, and it is on the radar of council. I can tell you that as a topic that we know we need to deal with, but we haven't progressed to the point where it's steering one way or the other. So.
Mhm.
But perhaps after that, I'll turn it over to you to maybe speak to the rest of the conference, the questions, if you don't mind.
Sure, happy to. Marilyn, did you want me to go on this one and continue, or?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're absolutely right. So, and it's important to remember that the process that we're doing here through the official plan is separate and distinct from a short-term rental accommodation process. But to answer the question about the benefits in the communities that we've worked in, where this has come up, the difference between registration and licensing, in those instances, council and the communities generally viewed registration as sort of a first step towards licensing. And the benefit of the voluntary registration process was exactly as you had described. The municipality is aware that the property is being used for short-term rental accommodation purposes. So awareness would be one of the principles that would be very important. The second, usually with a voluntary registry process or even with a licensing, there's some sort of certification that, the smoke detectors in the home work, the septic system for the house is appropriate to accommodate the occupant load. So there's some certification that goes along and gives council and the community the reassurance that the residence is appropriate for the use, if you will, if I could describe it that way. So there's a public health and safety piece to this. And then there are two other benefits that other councils have described to us when thinking about this question. One is this notion of the responsible owner. So the word was used in one of the earlier sort of discussions. So as folks are sort of buying these properties and using them as income properties within communities, the community connections are lost because they don't reside in Bonfield, for an example. So if you have an issue with your neighbor, you go talk to your neighbor, usually the issue gets resolved. And in most cases where houses are being rented through platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo, you lose that concept of who the responsible owner is. So if there is an issue, the person next door doesn't know who to call. So the voluntary registration allows that person to be identified. So if there is an issue, that person can be called and the issue can be addressed before engaging enforcement, before engaging the other legislative tools that the municipality has. And then in some cases, municipalities are using the voluntary registration process to promote the short-term rentals within their community and to say, these properties have met a certain standard of public health and safety, and you have the confidence of renting these, knowing that these properties have met these standards. So it can work in a municipality's favor from an economic development and a tourism perspective, especially in a community like Bonfield, which has limited accommodation stock. So there's multiple benefits associated with both the informal registration and the licensing as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Manager Green?
If we're off short-term rentals, I have a question about something else before we move on.
I was about to move on to something else, but I'll let you go first. Go for it.
Okay. I had a question about, so the section that talks about Bill 23, the Act now permits as of right the 3-unit, the residential dwelling units. Has it been defined that it's specific only to urban parcels of land on municipal services, or does that and will that apply to us here?
That's a great question, if I may. But Jason, I know we've been having this discussion internally. I'm wondering if you have anything. Yeah.
Yes. So obviously, lots of discussion amongst planners now with the changes associated with Bill 23, but it is as Manager Green references. So 3 residential units are permitted on an urban parcel of land that permits residential uses. And what the Planning Act means by that is something that has municipal piped water and municipal piped sanitary services. So may not necessarily be applicable within a Bonfield context.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
And the only other piece that I wanted to add into this was, it's mentioned in the background, but another kind of sticking point that we've heard multiple times and on both sides of the issue is the recreational vehicles or the motorhomes occupancy on what is essentially vacant land. So that is something else that I know the municipality is going to be looking to deal with. So obviously taking that into consideration within the context of the official plan would be helpful as well.
Happy to. There is certainly a wide range of choices associated with that from a policy perspective, from prohibiting outright to permitting for a limited period of time to permitting for a longer period of time. So we'll make sure that the policy recommendations that we come back with are benchmarked against other municipalities within both your area and Northern Ontario. So committee and council can make some informed choices about what the right way to go for Vaughanfield is.
Wonderful. Anything else on this before we move on? Okay, 8.0 hamlet settlement areas and waterfront areas. Any preamble before we open it up for questions?
I don't think there's anything that we haven't yet discussed, except just to note that development is at, Lake Talon and Kaibuskong Bay are now at capacity for development. So that is one significant policy that will just be updated. The language of that will be updated to limit development in those areas. The main basin of Lake Nosbonsing hasn't changed. So there won't be any need to update the policies for that lake specifically. And I think that's an update that we've included since the report draft in front of you there. So wanted to update you on that, but I think that's it on our end here. Interested in any feedback you have.
What do you mean by limit lakefront development? Like, say, are you talking about not giving out building permits for vacant lots or development commercial?
Yep, that's a great question. So that would be about severing lots. So there's no opportunity for new development in addition to what is in existence. Have I explained that sufficiently, Jason? Or okay. Yeah. So that would be in terms of severance specifically. Does that answer your question there, though? Have I clearly answered that for you?
Yes, that anything existing, but no severances.
Yes, and so redevelopment of existing lots would also continue.
And to clarify, we can still do lot additions because we're not creating new lots, correct? Does that?
Yeah, that would be not considered adding to the capacity. Yeah.
So I just have a question. You mentioned the Lake Talon, Kaibuskong Bay area is actually at capacity, so no new developments and no permits would be issued in that area?
No, sorry, building permits could still be issued and redevelopment on existing lots would also still be permitted. It would just be that no lots can't be severed into smaller parcels.
Sure, okay.
Of land. Yeah, that's the difference there.
Okay, any other comments or questions on that one? Seeing none, 9.0 rural and agricultural areas. I have a feeling we've also probably exhausted this one, but I don't know if you have any preamble to jump in with before the committee.
Jason touched on it earlier. So the only thing to consider here is that the township has been asked to do an evaluation of potential prime agricultural areas within the township. So this is a question from the ministry. And this might have implications for severing into smaller parcels of farmland. So there will be some updates to the policies based on that evaluation and whether the ministry requests that those lands are then redesignated to be prime agricultural areas.
So I guess my only question coming out, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure if this is a question to Manager Green or to the consultant. So prime agricultural designation results in what? So if you can kind of just, obviously the ministry has interest to know if there's prime agricultural, but if we come back and say yes, how does that limit and what does it limit?
It would result in need to use policies that are more protective of those farmlands, of those agricultural lands. Jason, maybe you can speak to more specifics there.
Sure, yeah, happy to. So it would result in a significant policy shift from your rural policies to the agricultural policies. So as I was alluding to earlier, so generally when we're thinking about these questions, prime agricultural lands are class 1, 2, and 3 soils in that order of priority. And then prime agricultural areas is the prime ag land plus 4, 5, 6, and 7 CLI soils. So what the ministry is asking us to do is to use one of their established methodologies, and there's two different methodologies that we can use. One is, they'll get into the details, one is a fairly simplified methodology and one is a more complex methodology. But the outcome of that is basically a map which illustrates where your prime ag lands are and where your prime ag area is. And using the current provincial policy statement as a guide, the current provincial policy statement allows a wide range of agricultural and agriculture-related uses in prime ag areas, but it prohibits lot creation for residential development purposes effectively. So lot creation is allowed for minor technical adjustments to lot boundaries. You could do it for a resident surplus to a farming operation. You can do it to create another agricultural parcel. But if somebody has, say, as an example, a parcel of land that's designated for prime agriculture, and they come before council and say, I would like to create 4 lots because I believe there's a market to sell these lots, the current provincial policy statement would prohibit that from happening. So that's one of the major differences. So the intent is, when there's provincially significant prime land, that soil and those lands are going to be protected for the use of Ontarians over time. That's the general idea behind it. So it's not any different than a natural heritage policy for a provincially significant wetland, for example. Similar policy principle comes into play.
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment about that. In looking over the last few years, a lot of farmland has been severed, and there's a lot of new buildings up, and I've been here in Rutherglen and Bonfield area for quite some time. So in looking at the farms that are considered the prime farms in the area, they have been all severed. And I'm just wondering what would be the purpose of a study when one time, this is a few years ago, that apparently they did a study that said that there was not the soil content was not prime soil for farmland. And when I look at it now, it concerns me, because all of the big farms in our area, if you drive around Development Road, even Talon Lake Road, all of the area that there were farms there now, most of the farms have been severed into lots. And one was our farm, my mom and dad's farm, that was sold many times and have been severed because my son owned it at the time. He never planned on farming it, but there are new residential lots on them. The property has been severed. So I'm just wondering, what are we looking at? I guess when we talk about the farm, are we looking at closing the barn door and the horses have all left? Because that's my thoughts.
Would you like me to respond, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Love the analogy, and Bonfield is not unique in this regard. So we see this sort of happen in several communities as well. So there are sort of two pieces to this, I guess. So the first piece around development has already happened. So severances have already happened. If we do the review to determine where the prime ag lands are, we need to take those pieces into consideration. So that would be part and parcel of that. And the province has a tool that they use. It's called the minimum distance separation formula. So when you're creating a residential lot in a rural or agricultural area, you need to assess the compatibility between that residential parcel and any farming parcels, be they on rural designated land or agricultural designated land. So what that essentially does is it throws up a buffer between the two uses, and it says either it's safe to create the residential parcel. In this case, it's the inverse question. It's you have residential, what is the constraint that then applies to the agricultural lands? Because again, we're trying to create land use compatibility between the two. So that could be factored in, I think, to that analysis. Then the second piece to this in my mind, as I connect it back to sort of our discussion earlier on climate change. So the climate is changing, obviously, and I know, as I mentioned before, I'm in Sudbury, and there's a lot of discussions in Sudbury happening right now because we do have prime ag land within the basin where the meteorite impact hit many years ago. So the question in Sudbury is, what impact will climate change have on the soil capabilities? And will it mean that the soils that we have now will have increased capabilities in the future? So that's another question that we sort of consider as we go through this analysis. It's a very complex question, and Marilyn and I are not climate scientists, nor are we soil scientists, but we'll bring our best sort of lines of evidence to bear on that question to sort of see what the outcome is. Depending upon the results of the study, we'll base our recommendations on that should we decide to go down that path. And at that point in time, council will have choices to make. If council can designate prime ag land and it can choose not to. The risk of not doing it is when the document goes to the province for approval. The minister has the ability, as council knows, to approve the plan, refuse the plan, or modify any or all part of the plan, and then approve the modified portions as the official plan, so that it is an issue that we need to look at. The ministry has raised it, and we need to come back to them with some information, because there is the possibility that they will modify the plan to include the provincial version of the prime ag area in the document, and that ministry decision is unappealable. So then council will be left with an official plan that has a version of the prime ag area that it may not agree with, and it may not have had the opportunity to shape what those boundaries look like.
Okay. Any other, Manager Green?
So I guess that was going to be my question then, is what it would look like if council decided not to do the recommended study.
Yeah, yes. So if council chose not to do the study, then we would have to reflect and determine how we answer that question as professional planners, because it has been raised and we have an obligation to answer that question.
Okay. Thank you.
So sorry, I guess this is more of a nuts and bolts question, but talk to me about that study. So it's soil samples, it sounds like. I don't know what that looks like or to the scale. And
sure.
And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I'm getting excited about the mechanics of the study. So there's, as I sort of said, there's two different versions. One is the acronym is ALES, so it's an Area Land Evaluation System Review. And then the other one is a LEAR, it's a Land Evaluation Area Review. So we don't actually do soil samples. So the good news is there is, we call it CLI, Canada Land Information mapping, basically for all of the country, which looks at class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4 to 7. So what we do is we start there, we overlay the property fabric that you have in Bonfield today, then we overlay the uses, we see what's being farmed, what isn't being farmed. We do a little bit of analysis to deal with land use adjacencies, so the compatibility that I was describing. And then the province has minimal area units that they apply to different parts of the province, which determines what's a viable farm size. So in my context in Greater Sudbury, the answer is 76 acres. If you're down south, it's a different minimal area requirement. So we look at that, and then we basically look at the results of the GIS analysis, and we say, this appears to be where the highest and best agricultural land is. That gets submitted to the province for some review and comment, and there's some feedback back, in addition to feedback loops with council. So if it's, it sounds like a big study, but really it can be undertaken on a desktop review and doesn't require sending anybody into the field to do any detailed soil testing or anything like that.
That's great. Thank you. It's far more interesting than I thought it would be. Anything else on this one? 10, recreational parks and open space. Any preamble?
There's very little updates to be made here aside from recent legislative changes to parkland dedication. So the majority of the updates to the official plan would be related to this, unless you have other feedback to provide.
Anybody from the committee? Additional feedback on this? Seeing none. Number 11, mobility. Any preamble?
Again, actually for this and all the remaining sections, we've covered most of my preamble, and these sections will really just be updates consistent with the PPS, the current PPS 2020, or any changes that come over the next few months. And then specific to mobility, we would suggest a schedule of roads and potentially recreational trails that could be used for tourism as well, within an official plan update. To any of the mapping there. So, but otherwise, these would just be language changes that are consistent with the PPS.
Okay, questions, comments? Seeing none. Number 12, servicing. Questions, comments? Seeing none. 13, oh, sorry, Manager.
Yeah, I had one about, so lot size for development. Is that something that, like, what is that looking like? Like possibly allowing smaller lot sizes, or?
Could I just ask for clarity on that one?
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. For new lot creations, our minimum lot size right now is 2.47 acres, so 1 hectare. I have had a lot of feedback when people apply for consents. Like, I know they can go smaller applying for minor variance, and then we have to do specific studies, but I was wondering if that minimum size requirement, is that looking different at all? Is there a need to assess that? Is that something we can even consider reducing, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm seeing your comment here in the document, and I just wanted to navigate to it. That's absolutely a discussion we can have about what those minimum should be to be appropriate. I think you put that with that note with a comment about intensification in settlement areas, and then also asked about whether there might be potential to have different minimum size requirements for rural versus in the hamlet settlement areas. So that's a discussion we could continue having. Mm-hmm. Jason, do you have anything to add specific to smaller, larger?
No, I agree. Well, definitely something we want to continue to look at, but maybe to address Manager Green's sort of concerns about some of the feedback maybe that she's heard in the past. So 2.47 acres, I don't know how to describe this, benchmarks well with the minimum lot area requirements that other municipalities are using. So if I'm thinking about Northern Ontario specifically in your area, what you'll typically see is minimum lot sizes anywhere from 2 acres to 5 acres. And the minimum lot frontages will range anywhere from 45 to 90 meters. And then in a couple of cases, the lot frontages will go up to 120 meters. But again, it all ties back to council's objectives for growth, how they want to see growth happen in the community. And again, going back to the 2020 provincial policy statement, remains to be seen whether this will remain the same in the updated PPS, but council does now have additional flexibility to decide what is locally appropriate in terms of development within the rural area. So hopefully, does that answer the question, Manager Green? Or
yep.
Somewhat?
Yep.
Okay. Seeing nothing else, 13, minerals and mineral aggregate. Questions or comments? Seeing none. 14, cultural heritage. Looking, any questions, comments?
Do
Seeing
we
none.
have any
Oh,
cultural, any heritage sites here within Bonfield?
Manager Green, did you want to?
Yes. Can't, I think so. I should know that answer.
That's okay.
As should-
Like in terms
Yes,
of,
but yeah.
well, part of it could be considered like our sand and gravel, right? As
The first spike.
yeah, yeah, but sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay.
Okay.
So if I may, the one that came to mind for me was also the first spike. I don't believe there are any provincially designated heritage sites though.
Closest one is Pemisi Bay, I think.
Okay, anything else? 15, protecting public health and safety. No preamble to this. Any questions or comments to what's in the report? Seeing none, I believe I've come to the end of the document. So, is there any other overarching questions, comments before we move on? Anything from your standpoint that you'd like to add in as we close this section?
Thanks, Chair. My last question to the committee would just be if there's anything we haven't discussed that you'd like to make sure we discuss with the public at the upcoming open house.
I don't, this covered all the points that I had.
I have a question outside of that.
Go ahead.
The Algonquin land claim, if that goes through the 181 acres that is in the township, so they would be able to develop that, like subject to our policy and regulations?
That is a great question. Jason and I were discussing this this afternoon, and I think we're not sure the answer of that yet, just because the agreement is still under negotiation. So that intuitively makes sense, but I don't know that we will know the results of that until that agreement is finalized.
Okay.
If I could add one point to that. So I think I think that there will be a deference to municipal planning documents. So council's official plan and council zoning bylaw will apply. Whether or not the lands can be subsequently transferred or sold or disposed of is sort of a separate question that we're still working on.
Okay. So moving on, 5B, which is discussion on the open house and the committee involvement. Manager Green, did you want to speak to that, or are we turning it over to you?
That's just for us. If we want to thank Marilyn and Jason and let them exit, they can if they wish to.
Absolutely.
Can I just ask one question? When it's at the open house, is it clearly shown to the residents of Bonfield what changes are happening to the official plan? Like, kind of plainly laid out?
Thank you. That's a great question. At this open house, it will be much more of a sort of a visioning session, really just gathering general feedback from the public about what their priorities and concerns are. At a later stage, we will be hosting a second open house, and this will present the draft. So in this way, they'll actually be able to see the changes that are specific to what's been made in the official plan and the zoning bylaw. But that will happen after a draft has been prepared and it has been initially reviewed by the ministry.
Okay, because sometimes I feel that residents may not know what is happening unless they're coming to every meeting or understanding what people were canvassing for, and unless that's like right before them, it's, oh my goodness, that took place, and they weren't really aware that's kind of what was going on. So I was just wondering if there is like changes is there some way that they can be made, aware of rather than finding out themselves? Like at an open house?
So I can just speak a little bit to it, only for the fact that, as a council, we have that conversation as well. And we, obviously, this being live broadcast, there are multiple opportunities for people to tune in. Obviously, we can't force people, but we try and get them as they catch into whether it's the YouTube or whether it's the newsletter that we mail out to every single household, or whether it's our website updates, or whether it's our municipal app. We are making aggressive attempts to try and have people engage. And it's a balance of that. We're always looking for open opportunities to say, if there's a way that we can do this better, that would draw people's attention to it on a more consistent basis, open to it. There are a number of things. I just want to thank the staff for, they do a yeoman service to try and make sure that people are getting the information. Just because a newsletter shows up doesn't mean everybody always reads it. But I don't know how to get that. If you have ideas, we're open to it. That's for sure.
I was just, one of them was like plainly kind of bullet of what changes are forthcoming or possibly. So now's your time to speak.
Yeah. And that's fair. And I think you're going to see the municipality make an effort with their newsletters or what have you, doing that, making sure that people know when it's time to have their voice heard. And, now's the time for your opinion versus if it's 3 months from now, it's probably too late, right? So,
yeah.
And the time will be at this open house, April 6th, correct?
Yes. So our hope with this open house coming up is that this will be sort of a less technical approach to this. The public will be able to engage on a more practical level and just state their day-to-day concerns for the reason that many people don't read the official plan, right? Most residents aren't looking into that until they have to. And so this is a one way of approaching that will be a little more hands-on for them, and they can just speak in plain language. So that will be the approach here. And then, we're open to potential ideas to look at for the later open house when we have those draft changes made to the official plan, to look at here's what's changed, and then gather feedback on that. So that's something that we could talk about for that second open house. And of course, we're open to different techniques and methods you'd like to use to do that.
That's great. So I will take this opportunity. Thank you very much. This is a lot of work you've already put into this, and we're only at the beginning stages, believe it or not. So thank you very much for all the work that you've done. We look forward to the many steps ahead. And April 6th, I guess, will be the next time we will be seeing you, which will be the open house. So thanks again. Appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for your feedback. Good evening.
I guess they didn't want to stay for the rest of the meeting.
Well, in case
That's fair. That's fair.
I will let them go.
Yeah. Okay, we will move on to 5B, which is discussion for the open house and the committee involvement. So, Manager Green, did you have?
So I do have copies of the flyers that JLR has prepared and given to us. What I've done and what we're working on is they are being posted on our website. They're posted on our municipal board here and in the office for anyone to come in. We can do a mail out notice. It's about $195. So that reaches every mailbox in our municipality. We have our township app. We can send a notice out to say there's an open house on April 6th. I had looked into the newspaper to run an ad. Initially, they had told me it was $900 to run an ad once. And I will mention, so this open house is not the statutory open house that we have to have under the Planning Act. That's our second one that we have to advertise in the newspaper. So that $900 cost will have to be expensed at that time. This is in addition to the budget that we've paid for the review. So this is a budget I have to work with or implement in part of our budget approval process to add these extra costs to try and advertise. So I guess I wanted committee's feedback or any other ideas. Do we want to do a newspaper ad this time at that expense? Is there something any committee member can contribute, or is someone willing to go post a flyer at our store? Is there an area in your area of your community that we can post a notice to get it out more? Or again, if anyone else has any other ideas about getting the word out.
Like the post office or the stores? Gagne's, yeah.
Yeah.
I just like,
Gagne's.
yeah, I just like the idea of getting it for $195, getting it in everyone's mailbox.
Rather
mail
than the
out?
newspaper.
Yeah.
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 And that.
And
Yeah.
especially
And-
that looks like I want to read it because it's colorful.
Yeah, so
Because it's not
yeah, for the mail out version, I can do this with this one attached to the back. So
Yeah.
this is like a general one. There's more information on this one, but they both contain the same thing. But we can do a plain black and white, double-sided 8.5 by 11 mail out for the $200. I don't see that being an issue at all, working that into the budget for that expense.
No, I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Me too. I'm just speaking like for this, to me, a lot of people don't know what an official plan review is. And so when, like, if I was at the store and I'm reading, and that might be on your notice.
Yeah.
That, updated policy for matters such as, and these are listed. Oh, I'm interested in that. I didn't know that's how it all took place, or,
Mhm.
it, kind of gives you bullets at what the municipality is kind of thinking of.
And that presentation is also linked on our website. You're referring to the presentation JL Richards did from February 15th. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also linked on our website, so people can access and take a look at that. But the notices do, they provide a little overview about what an official plan is in a zoning bylaw.
Mhm.
So if someone does come up and see the notice hanging in the store, they can get an idea of what is going on and what it's for.
And is that the mail out right there?
Well, yes, a version of it could be.
Oh, yeah.
There's this one, and then there's also, this one has more detailed information on it, and I can put that in one document and mail it out.
Like, is it possible though to address the concerns that we gave them
In the notice,
in your mail out?
I don't know if we want to include in a mail out inviting the public to an open house, specific things, because we don't want to cause confusion on this is only what we're discussing. The notice is a general come out, discuss your concerns overall with it talks about types and locations of housing, business, industry, phasing of future development, protection of nature, culture and heritage, community improvement incentives, and much more. Is kind of the overview that the notice has in it.
Yeah, so I agree with Manager Green in the fact that you don't want to scope it, because then, because really this is an opportunity for the public to come in and tell us what they need to tell us, not within this sphere, but if there's other things.
No.
But perhaps if, and I don't know when our next municipal, what do you call pamphlet by brochure, what do we call it?
Newsletter,
Thank
spring,
you. My goodness.
possibly.
Yeah, so perhaps a section in there, what does the official plan mean to me, or something like that, right? And then maybe that can be listed in some of that. And I mean, this is a big deal for the municipality, so I would imagine taking up a small piece of the newsletter shouldn't be too much to ask.
No. So is any committee members willing to take copies?
yeah,
and,
sure, of
and
course.
okay,
I can
I
as
can
well.
leave
Yeah, yeah.
everyone. Okay,
Absolutely.
To hang up.
That's easy.
it just saves me time from running around and
100%.
yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, then I think that's, unless there was, yeah.
Okay. And if the municipality has social media, obviously we will use it as well. moving on to unfinished business. So 6A, consent application B3 2022 Descon construction deferred.
Yep, so that's still, it's still deferred at the moment. However, they have requested to bring the application back forward for our next committee meeting. So you'll see that application, April 4th, I believe, is our next meeting.
Okay. Section B, consent application B1 2023 Pro Dominic is also deferred.
That one's still on deferral, yeah.
And then C, Bill 23, canvassing opinions for review in progress.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to gather options, as we discussed in our last meeting, to have that review performed for us on the planning act, on our planning applications that the Conservation Authority can no longer do. So that's still a work in progress.
Okay.
Just on Bill 23, is there some kind of like short list of the major points that are being, you know, that I can just kind of look at, because basically I don't want to read the whole thing.
Yep, I do have a report that the Ontario Committee of Adjustment Association had sent out that just it's a table that goes through what's in effect, what's not, that I can share with the committee tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Highlights.
And the only thing, and I'm going a little bit backwards here. I'll take the liberty as the chair to go a little bit backwards. But one of the things when they asked if there's any other considerations, not necessarily part of the official plan, but probably part of the zoning bylaws, I think is where it belongs. But there's been some concern raised about, let's call them small farm animals like chickens. Let's just put it out there within our kind of hamlets or our developed areas, and apparently that's currently not allowed. Some people have expressed it's an idea to put out there for conversation to see if anybody is really objected to the idea of opening that up. Obviously, having a 3-head cow on Yonge Street, probably not a great idea, but if it's a couple of chickens, I don't know.
Seen pigs and cows and stuff.
Yeah.
My young days, it was just normal. It was, I'm not joking.
That is something that I have already raised
Great, thank you.
to JLR in our early conversations, as we had back in was it the summer last year. We had received a written concern from a resident about raising livestock in the residential area, so our hamlet area, because right now our zoning only permits in the rural area, and that, again, that was something that's been brought to their attention, to look at regulations or something to that effect.
You want to raise livestock, go to the rural area.
No, for sure. If you're talking cows and if you're talking, but I mean, if it's chickens or what have you, I don't know if how people feel about that. It's something that I think should be put on the table for consideration, because we did get the letter, and if the person was correct, on this side of the street it's not allowed, but on this side of the same street it is allowed, right across the street, right? So I get there has to be a line somewhere. It's interesting that we end up in that predicament. So
I even heard people complain that they were living in the rural areas and complaining about the noise of the chickens and stuff.
Oh, well, that's yeah, probably prime agricultural land.
Yeah. Prime for chickens. Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I ask, when you talk about the agricultural study, is that in an additional cost to us for this? And when I say this, because at one time there was a study done and that they determined that there was not prime soil for farmland, and that's when they rezoned it rural residential. So I'm just wondering, when it costs us additional money for it, why are we doing the study?
I can answer that they did note it was not, this study was not included in their scope of work. So my understanding is it would be an additional cost. I have raised the question recently about that cost. I'm waiting to find out what that looks like to then present it to, I believe that would be a council thing for consideration, because they, like they had said, they are recommending we do it to avoid getting to the end of the plan approval. Outside of that, though, I can't, like, we'd have to refer back to I feel like a technical question to the consulting firm about that further.
I'm just wondering.
Why they
'Cause
want
well,
it.
like I said, when you drive all over our municipality, you see prime farms that were farming. There were cattle, there was a lot of activity on the farms. Now you see all the severances on the farms, and it's becoming very residential. And that's maybe it's just a concern I have. I don't know
It was all,
anybody else
was
thinks
all
that.
farming before, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll just point out, I find a bit of irony in the fact that the ministry is asking and enforcing Bill 23, which is More Homes Built Faster Act, and it applies to the municipality of Bonfield. And at the same time, then we're also from this saying, you know, let's take a look at our agricultural lands, and that's basically taking the ability away from potential landowners from severing and building. So it just feels a bit of a contradiction to me, but it's not necessarily for this table. That's for
I
sure.
don't mind asking it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like they had mentioned as well, most of our vacant land that's available for severance is outside of our settlement areas. It's in our rural area because we don't have much vacant land in our settlement areas for development. So
Right.
The majority of our development does occur in our rural areas.
And I honestly feel as though with the way that the economy is going and people working from home, economic development is going to come in residential growth as people look for a bit of a bigger lot. It doesn't have to be the farm size lot, but they're looking for a bit of a bigger lot that they can live on and work out of and have a remote job. And if we don't have the space for that to grow, it's limiting to the township, right? So. Okay, anything else before we wrap? Do we have a motion for? Look for a mover to adjourn the meeting. And seconded by Member Paquette. Moved by Member Foisey, seconded by Member Paquette, that the Planning Advisory Committee be adjourned at 7:47 p.m. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
You just want to go ahead and end the meeting now?